Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm Steve Johnson, and we have quite a few diverse and interesting topics to cover. They're all related to what's happening in the news these days. And, of course, we're going to be taking a look at some of the veterans in and around us, as well as some of the people who perhaps could be veterans because of the volatile areas of the world. And that's where we find different mindsets, different values, different religions. And that brings us to George Houssney. He was born in Tripoli, Lebanon. And for the past 25 years, he's been the president of Horizons International, and the headquarters are right here in the United States in Boulder. But the focus is to reach Muslims on 4 continents, and he has written a book called Engaging Islam. George, it's great to have you with us. Good morning.
I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You have made an interesting trip in your life, I can tell, all the way from Tripoli to Boulder. Not exactly two areas that are the same, and I think that's a fascinating thing to kind of look at your own trip there. But I want to ask you a question, and those who perhaps are looking at your book, Engaging Islam, will read this, but for those who haven't, what would you say is the biggest misconception that the United States or we as Christians have about Islam that you see recurring? Because I think there are misunderstandings, but what are you seeing them to be?
One of the major things is people get in the news media news about terrorism and killings and destruction and so on. But there are a lot of peace-loving Muslims, and we need to recognize that too. There are both, and we need to know the truth. We can't say Islam is peaceful because we see what's happening every day, and that is Islam, one version of Islam, the fanatic version of it. But those who come to America are generally people who love America. They want our education, they want our economy, they want to live in freedom and take advantage of the opportunities afforded to them in this country. And we need to welcome them, but also take advantage of them being here to share with them the gospel of salvation through Jesus Christ alone.
Is that how Horizons International comes into play?
Exactly what we do. We have a ministry on campuses. We reach out to international students of all nations, and that includes 40% Muslims.
And I'm sorry, you said you do this on campuses mostly, is that correct?
University campuses mostly, but we're not limited to the campus. But we start in a city on university campuses, and then we go into the community as well.
So what is your background then? Were you raised in a Muslim community?
I was born and raised in Lebanon, in the Muslim city of Tripoli, but I came from a Greek Orthodox family, which was a minority, both in Lebanon as a whole, but particularly in my city, which is predominantly Muslim. But I came to faith in Christ through evangelical ministry in my teen years.
And so you were able to kind of see, I suppose, some of the, how do I say it, the speed bumps to being able to talk to those who have the Muslim faith, because you grew up in that community. What would you say it is that perhaps Christians do, if I can use a term, wrong, to reach out to Muslims that may be putting in some sort of roadblocks to actually having the discussion you're talking about faith?
Well, in my book, which is right here, a copy of it, Engaging Islam, Chapter 3, I mentioned 3 major reactions. There are 5 of them, but I'll mention 3 that Christians have towards Muslims. And they're all wrong. One is fear. We're afraid of them. And you can see that at the airports everywhere. That's why there's so much scrutinizing us at the airports. But also anger, fury. And many people are just very angry at what's happening, especially to Christians, the persecution, massacring of Christians, and sex slave, selling Christian girls, and so on. And the third one is fascination. There are those who, rather than being angry They're more sympathetic towards Islam. They're trying to show the good image of Islam. They become fascinated by Islamic devotion and are welcoming Islam without challenging Islam with the truth of Jesus Christ. All those three are wrong, and the right answer, the biblical response, is loving people, even if they are our enemies. Jesus wants us to love them. But also, even if they're not our enemies, they're our neighbors, our friends, we still need to love them. But loving means loving them with the truth, not loving them just accepting whatever, but sharing the truth of the gospel.
Well, and I was going to say that some of the things that you mentioned, like the sex slave trade, as well as the way women are treated, and some of the cultural values are certainly something that I think Americans and those who are Christians as well have found an opposition to it. But do you say then that although we may have disagreement with that, you set it aside to be able to talk solely about the truths of Christ? Is that the concept that you're saying, is that you may not approve these things, but you don't dwell on that, you look at how we can influence people for Christ?
Well, we've heard it said that God loves the sinner but hates the sin. And we need to hate Islam because of what it does, but we still need to love the Muslims. Most Muslims, vast majority, are not Muslims by choice. They're Muslims because they were born into it. They've not been given an alternative, and that's where we come in. And we are seeing many Muslims come to Christ in the hundreds in the US, in tens of thousands in certain countries, and even in the millions globally, where Muslims are leaving Islam and seeking an alternative and finding Jesus to be the only alternative.
Why do you think that is? What is it that's influencing them in that direction?
Well, in the last 13 years, since September 11, 2001, and the bin Laden movement, Al-Qaeda, and more specifically the last 4 years since the Arab Spring, which is the revolutions that are still taking place in many countries, most prominently Iraq and Syria right now, and Libya as well as Yemen. Lots of many countries that we don't even hear about. All of this is exposing the Muslim population, the common man, the common Muslim, the moderate Muslim. And moderates make up 60 to 70% of the Muslim population. They're being exposed for the first time to the negative and to the ugly face of Islam, to the violent face of Islam. And they don't really want to subscribe to that. They were born into Islam being told that Islam is about peace. And then now they're starting to see this, and reading the Quran, they're finding hundreds of verses that speak to the violence that the ISIS group and many Boko Haram and many other terrorist organizations are quoting in order to justify their violence and their action, hatred. When an ordinary Muslim sees that, they say, I don't want Islam anymore. I'm fed up with this. And many of them are suffering under Islam. For example, the Shiites are being persecuted by the Sunnis. Within the Sunnis also, several denominations of the Sunnis are persecuting each other. We see that in Syria now. ISIS is not only killing Shiites and Christians and also Yazidis, but they're also killing other Muslims who don't agree with them.
Well, okay, if in fact they're realizing what you were saying about the violence of Islam, they could go in any direction, but you say that you're seeing a significant number moving towards Christianity. What is it about Christianity that becomes attractive to them at that point?
Well, I have conducted a survey among 120 people. I've reported it in my book too. 85% of them said it is the love of God, the love of Christians, love of Christ. Something to do with love. The message of love is missing in Islam. Although Muslims may deny it, the God of Islam is not a loving God; it's a more hateful, angry God, and Muslims are frightened of him. And when they come to close to Christians, and they see how relaxed we are about God, because He is our Father, we can sit in His lap and enjoy His presence, and they are very attracted to that.
I know that the Christianity, if we go back into the Old Testament, there is a link between the Bible and Islam. Is that a connecting point as well, where they can go back and see this lineage that did split apart, but at one point had been somewhat together? Is that an attractive point, or is that not even a factor?
In listening to testimonies, many people say that the Quran led them to the Bible. But they read the Quran and they see things about Jesus. For example, one person from Egypt who was a leader in the Islamic Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, he saw things about Jesus that he couldn't see in Muhammad, even in the Quran and in Islamic theology. For example, Jesus was healing the sick, the blind, the deaf, the dumb, raising the dead, even creating. The Quran says that Jesus created a bird from clay, sort of like God created Adam from clay. He says, wow, this is really... So that led them to reading the Bible, and that led them to believing in Jesus.
The book is called Engaging Islam. The author is George Houssney, who was born in Tripoli, now lives in Colorado, and he's a president of Horizon International. Again, the book called Engaging Islam. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we'll be back with more on Focus today as we are commemorating this Veterans Day.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Well, we're back on Focus today, and of course on this Veterans Day we are focusing on some of the activities and the things that people have done to make this day something to really look back on and thank them for what they have done all the way back from World War II up until the current incursions that we've seen. And Sergeant Mike Kuenstler is with us. You have been an Iraqi war veteran, and you are back, obviously. You're not in Iraq now. You are here. You live in Rogue River. Give us your story. When did you join the service? Well,
I joined the service in 2005. Just wanted to serve my country. For me, I wanted the toughest challenge, and since I'm a Marine, I'm partial to the Marine Corps, so I wanted that toughest challenge of boot camp to get through that in my life. I faced a lot of challenges growing up in Rogue River High School, wanting to be something and wanting to do something with my life. And being a Marine had stood out to me in the 7th grade.
I was going to ask you, because some people, they grow up and they say, this is what I want to be, and 7th grade it was.
So in 7th grade, I had a teacher, Mr. Haas, and he was a Marine, and I did a report on it. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if I go home and ask my parents if I sign a waiver that you can ask me to do push-ups instead of giving me detentions? And so he every time I spoke out in class or did something wrong, I had to do push-ups, and that kind of geared me up towards wanting to be a Marine. I joined with my best friend at the time, Ryan Perez, and we went in together, and as you say, the rest is history. Went over to overseas in Iraq and deployed for a year, did some awesome stuff over there.
And what year was that you started, you said? In
2005 I started, and I went overseas in 2007.
Okay. Now, some people have multiple deployments, and I don't know how that can even happen when they have like 4 deployments and all that. You were fortunate to have one?
I was fortunate to have one, but we usually, Marines at the time, were going over for 6-month pumps, and then we actually went over for a year pump. We were the unit that helped all the other units change out during their 6-month tours. So some Marine units go over there for about a year. The Army units are usually over there for a year up to 18 months.
Yeah. Was it what you expected?
It was different. It was a shocker. It was crazy to see some stuff. I remember a staff sergeant once told me, he said, the biggest success for me, Mike, he called me Lance Corporal Kuenstler at the time when I was just a youngster in the Marine Corps, and he said, when I saw this young lady, a girl who had never gotten a chance to go play outside before, she went and ran around in a circle with a stick. And he said that was rewarding. Wow. She had never been able to go outside and play. She didn't know how to play. And he said when he saw the fact that he was able to liberate that freedom for her to walk outside and to run around with a stick and just play. And you know, we come back and we look at all our kids and all the stuff that my kids have. Yeah. And she was content running around in a circle with a stick. Wow. It changes the perspective of things for you.
So your job was to help other soldiers as they're coming in?
Our job was to maintain the Fallujah proper area.
Oh, you're in Fallujah, okay.
Fallujah proper area while the other units changed in and out. So we would provide security details and do all the combat team stuff while these other units were coming in and coming out of their deployments. We call it right seat, left seat. They would come in, they would learn how to do it, and we would maintain the area for them, you know, because we were there for a year. And so units are pumping in and out all throughout that year time frame, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year tour.
You know, the questions have been coming up about the shifting over of power, you know, to the government itself, sure, and whether they're ready or not. And I think a lot of us observing it say, you know, they're not having the training like the Marines do.
Sure.
And so did you see this as when that happens, it's going to fall apart, or did you have a level of confidence, or what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I take it back to my biblical perspective. When you look at it from that route, I don't see anything positive happening, you know, as far as the shifting of that, because we know that there is going to be fighting in the Middle East.
That whole region, yeah.
That's what the word says. Outside of that, the small differences that the United States made when we were there, and the things that I saw, and the ability to communicate and to liberate people. A story that I remember that I was told was about children who were liberated from like a slave labor camp that they had there doing just slave labor kid work.
Really?
And the United States came in and they freed all these children, like 40 of them, and I think one kid got hit in the crossfire. And so that is an amazing thing that these kids were able to go back to be free, to do whatever they needed to do. And so those small things are what makes Marines like me and all the other troops excited about what they do.
As far as long-lasting results of that, clearly on these kids' lives who were saved, sure, you know, that had an impact. Let's hope that they're not back into that. They're older now, so sure, perhaps not. When you look back on that, do you see the impact that you have made on individual lives there as well?
I see absolutely the impact that we've made on individual lives. Some of the interpreters that we would get and some of the people we would talk to, and just their love. There were some Iraqis that I communicated with that just had pure love. I mean, they were just wonderful, wonderful people, just like you and I, with families and kids that they're trying to protect. Mm-hmm. They weren't into the ISIS, or they weren't into these different things and these different groups, you know, trying to kill people. They were into just living life, trying to protect their families and raise their kids just like you and I would. Yeah. And so it's those kinds of relationships when you come over and you take the godly approach as a veteran, which is, you know, this person is my equal until I have to go face to face with them. But I'm going to treat them with respect, and I'm going to treat them with dignity.
When did you come back?
I came back in at the end of 2007. Quite a testimony there. My sister was killed in a head-on collision here, which brought me back a month before my year tour ended.
Wow. Well, I was going to ask you how it was to kind of reintegrate yourself. You had obviously other circumstances, sure, going on there, but when you look back, how hard was that to make the change?
A lot of us get numb. And so when you integrate back in, the challenge is that if you're motivated and you really like what you did, I mean, I was a successful Marine. I really enjoyed being a Marine. I enjoyed honor, courage, and commitment, portions of that, which make you an upstanding Marine, where you shy away from, you know, cheating and stealing and doing those things, and you hold yourself high. So when you integrate back into what you've done, or coming back into the States, it's tough sometimes because things don't function that way. Yeah. You know, for me to talk to a person, or in a job experience, you know, I'll talk to a boss, they don't get the picture. So as a young sergeant, here I am talking to my boss, or saying, hey, what about this plan? What about this plan? Well, you don't have the option to be heard sometimes, you know, because now I'm not a sergeant anymore. I'm not an E5. I don't have the kinds of responsibilities that I did. Mm-hmm. Now I'm at the bottom of the barrel again in the workforce, and that's a tough integration for us. The anxiety, the PTSD just gets you going. You know, you raise a family here, so you don't have a weapon by your side every time that you walk out of your barracks or whatever. So being at home, you know, the high anxiety of, you know, somebody walking by your house and all that stuff is tough to reintegrate back into, because not everybody is the enemy and out to get you when you come home.
Have you had friends that have had a harder time? You seem to have reintegrated okay. Do you have some friends who've had a difficult time doing that?
Perception is everything. We hold ourselves high, but that's what military men and women do. Our pride, it's tough. You have to break down that pride wall. So the exterior looks really good, but I would ask you to ask my wife. There's some tough things that she has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We present ourselves well because that's what military men and women do.
Yeah.
They come back, they put their pack on, and they keep stepping. So when you have that kind of a mentality, sure, you see it as good to go, but on the inside there are some tough challenges that I face. But yes, I have friends that they can't drive, because of all the convoys they've done in Iraq and or Afghanistan. I've got people that can't walk into Costco, they can't walk into large crowds. My wife has helped me tremendously, and I will tell you right now that there is no man or woman that in the military that I would say can't count on their spouse. Our spouses are just amazing. For my wife to have to deal with what she deals with and to push through some of the stuff, and some of the other spouses out there, whether wife or whether husband, I just want to say I thank you 110%, because without them we would be lost.
Well, let me ask you, on this Veterans Day, when we're thinking back on all sorts of different incursions and war scenarios, and vets who've been out for a long time and others who haven't been as long, such as yourself, what is the best thing somebody can do for a vet today?
Pray for them. Well, that's my spiritual thing coming into play. Honor them. Veterans, and especially the Vietnam era veterans. Us OIF, OEF, we've been spoiled, and I'll be honest with you, we have.
You're talking about here in the U.S.?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've been spoiled. There's some things that the Vietnam veterans did for us. We have a lot of stuff coming to us, and we honor our prior veterans. This gentleman that's about to come on before me, it's hard to sit here. This gentleman went through probably stuff far beyond what I can imagine, and he's sitting in there. And it's because of people like him and people like the Vietnam veterans that paved the way for us young veterans. So I would just ask anybody to just honor the veterans for what they've done. Some people don't like the honor. It's hard for them because they don't think that what they did was positive, or they may have some different things. And so pray for them from the spiritual side and just honor them, love them. Just give them the love that they need,
Yeah.
Treat them like a human being.
All right, that's a good reminder. It doesn't have to be a grandiose effort. It just has to do with connecting with them. I see the public service announcements on TV where you'll see a few people coming back from a war area in an airport, and people start clapping, and you think, does that really happen? That probably has far more impact than one would think.
So it does. When I came back over, they actually had, it was pretty honoring when I came home. For my short break, I had a break in my year tour. I got to come home for a couple days and then go back over. Yeah. And when we pulled into the airport, the fire trucks were out there shooting water over the plane and just honor as we got off. And so you're in a day-to-day over there. You don't realize what you're doing, and it's just simple to you. It's the simple things of going through the motions. And so when you come back and hear somebody honoring you for what you've been doing day in and day out for day on, you don't have breaks in Iraq. You don't have days off. And in Afghanistan, it's hit the grinder all day long, all night long. Some people are up for 24 hours, all those times. And so when you have people that honor you when you come back, it does feel good.
Yeah, wow. Sergeant Mike Kuenstler, a veteran who is back and living in, are you living in Rogue River now?
I live in Rogue River now.
Okay. Well, thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you very much on this Veterans Day. And greet a vet today. Let them know you appreciate what they're doing. Thanks for being with us.
You betcha. Thank you.
All right. More coming up.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back to Focus Today. Steve Johnson with you, and I've got two guests. Mary Martin is an author of a book called Those Were the Days, and also we're with a retired World War II vet, Cal Pipal, and we're going to find out both of their stories. Of course, today is the day that we are commemorating those who have served in the various wars, branches of service in our area. And Cal, let me first talk to you about World War II. You're a World War II vet, and you were in a lot of places.
Yes.
weren't you, during that incursion?
Yes, 17 different places in the U.S. here.
And now, what division were you in World War II?
Air Force.
Air Force, okay.
Mm-hmm. Then it was the Army Air Corps.
That's right, yeah. That didn't come till after World War II.
Yeah, the
Air Force,
Army Air
right?
Corps, then during the war it was the Army Air Force, and after the war it was the Air Force.
And what did you do in the Air Corps?
I was, I was trained as a navigator on a B-29.
A B-20, oh wow, really? Mm-hmm. So you took quite a few flights, obviously.
Oh yeah, a lot of
those.
training flights, yes.
How many of those are still flying? Do you know?
One.
One? Wow.
One.
I think
Too bad, because there were thousands of them at the end of the war, but they were all destroyed, but one is still flying. It's by the Commemorative Air Force down in Texas there.
And I know that B-24s and B-17s the same way.
Yep,
There's
right.
just a handful of any of
That's
those.
right.
So
Yep.
that's an amazing thing for sure. Mary Martin is the author of a book called "Those Were the Days," and this has to do. In fact, let me just look at the subtitle here: "Profiles of Americans During the Great Depression and World War II." I mean, you're covering quite a large topic there when you have the Depression and World War II together. What was your motivation in writing this book?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist by trade, and the people that went through this era they deal with disappointment in a very different way than people do today.
Oh yeah, elaborate on that.
Yeah.
In how? How do you see that?
Well, there's a concept called radical acceptance, and what it is you jump, instead of grieving and staying in those stages of grieving, you jump to a place of acceptance. And then when you do that, you're asking, okay, now what? What am I going to do with this now?
So what you do is you jump over the stages that we've had before of anger, of
and the depression and the bargaining. And
is this a generational thing? Is that why people have done this? Do you find it with certain groups of people, like World War II depression people?
No, I think it's generational.
Yeah.
I think that what I found I interviewed about 20 people, and I've talked to lots of other people that are not in the book. And what I find is that their expectations were very different than they are today. And I think we could learn from these people.
Yeah, well, juxtapose those. And Cal, you might want to jump in on that too. The expectations are, and we've seen it generationally, but what have you actually been able to see from a standpoint of how they kind of come at loggerheads with each other? What are the expectations of the older generation versus the newer ones? Are we like quick satisfaction and theirs is more earned, that type of thing, or how does that work?
I think that they're basic, and my father grew up during this era. He was a World War II soldier as well. And he taught me that if you have a roof over your head and you have food on the table, you're doing well.
Is that your experience, Cal?
I would support that, because having grown up through the Great Depression, you know, if you had a roof over your head at that time, that was something. So your expectations were just basic. If you got beyond those, great. You worked for it, you got it. But the expectations were very basic. Food and shelter. That was about it.
And that's quite different than now, you're saying, obviously.
Well, the other thing that I saw that was really beautiful is that there was community back then. There was no welfare, there were no food stamps. As people went to the church, they went to their neighbors. Neighbors helped each other back then, didn't they?
No. Well, yeah, something when somebody needed some help, and I was in a farm area too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But you know, all the farmers would come together and see how they could help that individual.
And you had to. I mean, you had no other option.
Yeah, you had no other option.
Did you think that the government would step in to help out?
No, nothing like that at the time. That's one of the big differences I see today. You worked it out yourself and within the community. Today is what can the government give me? In my opinion, quite a drastic change. Yeah. And I think people don't stop to realize that the government doesn't give you anything without first taking it away from somebody else. And so I guess the sense of values are quite remarkably different from when I was a kid. Of course, I'm 90 years old now, and that's a long time, and so you see a lot of change.
Yeah, and you mentioned you were from a rural area. Where did you grow up?
So, on a farm in southwestern Wisconsin.
Oh, okay. And then you went off to World War II,
Yes.
and then did you come back to that farm?
No, I went back and went to college and got a degree in engineering.
That's right, because you're a retired chemical engineer for 3M.
Yes,
Now that's quite a bit beyond the basic roof over the head and all the rest. Was this as a result? Did you have a change during the war? Do you think to give you that opportunity that you wouldn't have otherwise had?
Yes, definitely. Because when I left high school, there were very few people that went on to college. College was more for the rich, but. Congress passed, I think it was the best piece of legislation ever passed, the GI Bill of Rights. So people came back from service, they could get money from the GI Bill of Rights and go to college, which is something they would have never been able to do otherwise. So that was a fantastic piece of legislation.
And you were able to become a chemical engineer because of that, right? Yeah. Well, Mary, let me ask you, from what you've seen with the generation that kind of grew up during those austere times, and now the ones that I'll just summarize it by, it's like the government owes me something, or I am owed something by somebody, whoever that is. How does that come to meld within your book, Those Were the Days? It sounds like those are two opposites, kind of butting against each other's head. Is that what you've experienced?
Yeah, I do. I wanted those values to be shared with people, and so at the end of each chapter, I have questions that families can sit down with the book and they can read each chapter, and then they can reflect on it, so that they can really start reflecting and questioning the values that they're assuming in their lives. Yeah.
You know, and the biggest change that I would say between what Cal has been talking about and what you're saying is, I remember there was a movie, I think it was with Steve Martin, where the family was growing up, and it was like the little kids were the little gods in the family, and the parents had to do everything. You know, their schedules had to work around the kids' schedules to make sure the kids were successful and happy, and everything they did was correct. I mean, that is really quite the opposite when you were growing up, I imagine. It was more survival, I would imagine.
It was survival, right?
Yeah.
And for example, Mary, going through the Depression, it was very difficult, but I took a man's place on the farm when I was 14 years old. I got up at 5 in the morning, I worked until 8 in the evening, just along with my dad, and all of the farm kids did it. You had to do it.
I was going to say, you weren't really alone in that. That was kind of what was expected.
No.
Did you like that? I mean, you had no choice, really.
I dislike it because it was accepted that that's what you had to do to survive. And so, you know, I didn't dislike it, although it was hard work.
Your children, grandchildren, can they relate to some of those issues? People who are younger, in their teens now? I mean, when you bring that up, do you get a look of just a blank look on their face? They can't quite relate to that?
In my case, at least, well, I'll give you an example. I went on a trip with parts of my family. One was a grandson. And one evening we just sat and talked. They just asked me lots of questions. And my grandson, who is now about 30, said, "Grandpa, the best part of that whole trip, we went down to Yosemite and other places, was that evening I spent listening to you."
Oh, nice.
And that was quite a compliment, I thought.
Yeah, and you were probably just thinking, well, it's...
Yeah, they'd ask me questions, and I'd tell them about my life, and that he had such a tremendous interest in it.
Why is it that people from your generation have a hard time opening up about World War II and some of those tough times? It seems like one has to kind of probe to find that out. What do you think the reason is for that?
I'm not really sure of that, but you're right, that's what it is. But I think as they say, well, I was in the service during the war, so were thousands of other people, so were millions of other people in World War II, 16 million in the military service. And that's 20% of the male population at that time was in the military. So everybody did it. So we'd come home and you just wanted to start a new life and go on with things. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was what everybody did, so it wasn't that big of a deal, is kind of what it looks like.
I mean, yeah.
When, I'm just curious, when Tom Brokaw wrote the book, The Greatest Generation, what did you think of that?
That was a good book. It was an excellent book, yeah. And I could relate to most of the things that were in it, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. I'll tell you what, we're going to be continuing our discussion. We're talking with Mary Martin, the author of Those Were the Days. We're going to find out a little bit about some of the research that she did and what she came away with more on that book, have her elaborate a little bit on that. And also Cal Pipal, retired chemical engineer for 3M and also a veteran from World War II in the Army Air Corps. So more on that coming up in just about 2 minutes here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back to Focus Today. Our guests today are Mary Martin. She's the author of a book called Those Were the Days, and Cal Pipal, a retired chemical engineer for 3M and also a World War II veteran in the Army Air Corps, who I found out during our break moved from Minneapolis to Medford to get out of the cold winters. And I think a lot of people can relate to all of that, so that's nice. Although we're going to have chilly weather here, it's nothing like what they've been having there for sure. And I want to mention that Mary has written a book called Those Were the Days, and it talks about the Great Depression as well as World War II, and you've got a lot of profiles in there of some of the individuals that you talked to who went through both of those experiences. Is that right?
Yeah.
What was it that you came across from that generation that kind of struck you, maybe surprised you in talking to some of those people?
I think their adaptability, which adaptability is a measure of mental health. And so they were extremely adaptable, and I do think it's because their expectations about life are very different. I think they also, faith was common back then, to have faith. And if the community you're in has faith, I think that it's a support system for that as well.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. An experience that I had was interesting. We sometimes think of older generations as not being able to adapt to what's happening new. And my brother and I think it was he and I were talking, this was several years ago. I had a couple of great aunts who, you know, we were really discussing, can people adapt? Is that really a problem? And you stopped and you look back and you realize, okay, here's a generation, slightly before your time, Cal, who they'd never seen an airplane. All of a sudden, one is flying in the air. And then now they're flying in jets. Okay, trains, kind of unusual. Now that back then, you know, in some places, they had grown through all of that. Automobiles, they never saw one, and then this thing comes puttering down the road, and now, you know, they're driving a Buick. You know? So, I mean, you know, and then layer upon that the use of computers and everything else. And I think one has to look at that to say, okay, because maybe they don't adapt the way you think that they should, these are people who have adapted an awful lot. And and I think even you're adapting. You grew up in a rural area of, what state again?
Wisconsin.
Sorry? Wisconsin. And come back from World War II, and through the GI Bill become a chemical engineer that you probably hadn't anticipated at all. I would imagine at that point you thought, had your dreams come true? Even dreams you didn't have. I mean, because you'd never thought of being a chemical engineer, did you?
Really, the last year in high school, I had a wonderful principal of the high school, small high school, 100 students, 44 years. And he sensed what my strong points were, math and science, and he guided me into engineering. If it wouldn't been for him, I wouldn't have been in engineering. Yet, if I were doing things over, I'd do the exact same thing that I did.
Yeah.
I was so pleased with the overall, but I had guidance there.
And he probably never thought that he was giving you something that would impact you throughout your whole career.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
And it shows the impact of one person on the lives. Did you find that also, Mary, in your book about how people were impacted by maybe seemingly small issues, but kind of changed their lives in some ways?
You know, I think a lot of what I was learning were that there were big issues back then. Much bigger than I think we experience today.
Like what? Like what did you find?
People died of the flu.
Oh, yeah.
The polio epidemic had not been resolved at that point. And there was one family I interviewed where they were just ready to buy their first house, and he contracted polio. And for 2 years, he was in bed with his wife going in and out of the bedroom. Nobody else went in.
Wow.
There was a sign in front of their house stating that, you know, there was somebody here with polio, and everybody walked on the other side of the street because it was so contagious.
That's pretty amazing, because we wouldn't even think of that these days, but
No.
yet back then, you're right, it was a different kind of emphasis, really.
They
wasn't it?
lost their house, they lost their income, they went to live with family because families helped families, communities helped communities. This man, he created a job driving kids to school in a rural area because he had use of one leg and one arm.
Wow.
And he figured out something he could do. Later, he bought a restaurant, and first he worked in it, and he was disabled the rest of his life. And then he bought it, and then he bought another place fixing washers, dryers, things of that nature.
Yeah. Do you find that theme then throughout, a sense of community? I'm just trying to see what it is that maybe we have as ties to the past as well as those things that we don't have. Is there a sense of community now but just different, or do you think we have a lack of community?
I think well, as a therapist dealing with people all day long, definitely, as I hear a lot of loneliness, isolation, that yes, I think really there was more community back then. And also, people had time to ponder. Is when you think about how they washed clothes, is they put them through the wringer washing machine. Everything was done by hand. They hung the clothes on the line. As they had time to think, to ponder, to relax. We're going from thing to thing to thing to thing.
Yeah.
And our brains aren't meant to work that way.
I think we think we're multitasking, but we're just doing a lot of single things, one after another, and coming back to the first one again. That kind of comes out that way.
Yeah.
Cal, when you look back and how life was different, what would you say are the biggest differences from when you grew up to what you see now?
I think, well, first of all, let's go back to sciences. I think in my lifetime, the two big advances would have been in medicine and in electronics. Getting a man to the moon. Would everybody ever thought of that when I was a kid? Heaven's sakes, no. Buck Rogers, but that was about as far as it would ever go.
Yeah.
Well, look what's happened. But the other thing is, again, I go back to what you said, Mary, the sense of community. Even though I lived on a farm out of town, the closest neighbor was a quarter mile away. But and in town, there was that small town, there was just that strong sense of community. You weren't going to get a government handout or anything like that. That was unheard of. You had to do it yourself, and you had to help others do it. And you don't see that today. I don't feel it today. First of all, there's internet. You can get whatever answer you need on internet. So why bother with anything else? To me, we've lost that. I can't say we've lost the sense of community, but it is downgraded from what it used to be. So those are the differences that I see.
And the family, I mean, the definitions have changed so much as well. And I would think that you talk about small towns had a sense of community. I would imagine that with the technology we have now, they say that you can be the most lonely person in a room full of people. So it doesn't matter how big or small a community is you're in, you can still have those problems that way. As far as when the title of your book, Mary, Those Were the Days, sound like it was always better than it is now, but I suppose it's a mixed bag as well because of the problems you mentioned, the polio, the flu, people dying of flu. We don't really think too much of that so much. Let's look at the positive things that we see now that we have. Is there, I suppose that'd be medicine would be one of the biggest things, but are there other sociological aspects that you see that have improved greatly over then?
I think there was more racism back then than there is now.
Yeah, there definitely was.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, even in the Army or Corps and the military, you had the separate.
That was segregated. Yeah.
Segregated. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was one other thing I was thinking of as well. Divorce. I've been with my husband for over 40 years, so I'm not an advocate of divorce, but I interviewed somebody who was a child of divorced parents, and she was an outcast, as other parents wouldn't let their children play with her.
And this was a product of this era that you're talking about, the Depression and
yes.
so on.
And so I think that our society tries to be more open, more accepting, hopefully more loving.
But it sounds like we have to relearn some of the things that from Cal's generation, maybe that sense of community.
Less self-sufficiency, I think.
And how does one, I mean, to kind of go in slightly a different direction from what we've been talking about, but how does one move into that? Because that's a tough thing to do, because we're all thought to be, you have to be self-sufficient, you have to kind of, get a government program if you need help and that kind of thing. Do you have any suggestions on how we go about creating that sense of community again?
Absolutely. I think that all of us are here. When you think, I have clients that come in and they want to know what's the purpose of their life? Why are they here? And I think it's to serve. I think we need to serve and be purposeful in that area. And so instead of focusing on ourselves, which I think our society does a little bit too much, is if you have a little extra, to look outside of yourself, to think about what can you do to help somebody else.
And that has to be, while as that was maybe a natural effort when you were growing up, that may be something that we have to actively seek out, because there are certainly, I talk to a lot of people with Access Health or the Salvation Army or whatever. I'm sure they can use a lot of help if people were just to make themselves available to do that kind of thing. So especially as I'm thinking we're coming up to Christmas, Thanksgiving. We think of these seasonal things, but I think if we were to institute what you're talking about as a lifestyle, that could certainly have an impact. Not only helping others, but also yourself too, because what you get back, has such a great emphasis too.
One of the things I recommend to clients that are feeling lonely or are isolated in some way is to identify a volunteer opportunity that they think is purposeful. And to get involved in something so that you're giving, because I think we feel we get back much more than we give.
I can vouch for that, because when I was 75 years old, I was asked to be chairman of the building committee at our church.
Oh, yeah.
And
what did you think? What did you think of that?
It was, I thought it would be simple and easy, but we ran into a lot of opposition, so we went 3 years of litigation. And before it was a 6-year assignment, really. Yeah. But we prevailed. But I look at it, and I gave whatever God-given talents. I used whatever God-given talents I had. But the big thing is, I received more from that experience than I gave. Yeah. And it was reaching out and doing some work, really volunteer, and getting rewarded just immensely.
That's cool.
And I look at the things I've done, where I've reached out and helped or tried to help, I've gotten more back than I have given. I get good returns on those investments. So, and it was been a wonderful experience.
And now you're thinking twice about when they want you to be on a church committee again. It may not be as simple as what it looks like.
Right?
A church building committee, that has to be one of the most complex situations, I think, to be on it, let alone be the head of it.
It was because of the legal aspects here.
Yeah. Cal, thanks for being here, as well as Mary Martin. Let me mention, Mary's book is called Those Were the Days, and it's subtitled Profiles of Americans During the Great Depression and World War II. And Cal Pipal, retired chemical engineer and a World War II veteran. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.